welcome to another Coffee Chats episode of the Crime Bistro Podcast. If you haven't listened to one of these before, I'm basically just going to tell you a bunch of scary stories that I've compiled all around a specific theme. So this week we've got one that I am really excited for. This is security camera horror stories. This podcast is a storytelling experience for the true crime enthusiast, so the theme fits really well into the true crime content. And our episode last week, I know, was particularly really dark, so I wanted to bring you something a little bit less intense. That being said, don't worry, these are still super creepy and very entertaining. It is currently Friday when I'm recording this, and this week has been super busy, so I'm really glad to just have the time to sit back and hang out with you all today, so thank you very much for that. With me right now, I have a lavender iced coffee, which isn't actually something that I get very often, but I really like them, so I should get them more. Anyway, we're pretty much going to just jump right into the episode today, so grab yourself your own coffee, caffeinated beverage, or emotional support water bottle, and let's go ahead and get started on these creepy stories. Okay, so we're talking about scary security camera stories today, so let's start off strong with one that has a little bit of a twist at the end. This is my gift to everybody before we really get into the bulk of the episode, since it's kind of lighthearted, and this story comes from the Ask Reddit subreddit, was posted about 4 years ago. I worked in one of the oldest buildings in my college town. It was once a Wild West saloon where 2 people were documented to have been killed in a shootout when the state was still a territory. In the 1920s, it served as someone's house where the youngest daughter was documented to have died in childhood. When I got hired on, even the owners talked about it being haunted. I'd never truly seen a ghost or had an encounter, but something about the building, particularly the office in the back and definitely the dirt basement, did not feel right to me at all. Not malevolent, but always really just off. This happened my first closing shift after I got promoted to key holder. I was also helping a new girl who has really taken the whole ghost spiel she got a few days ago to heart. This particular store ranged from small treasures that were almost too easy not to steal to a few items that cost about 5 times the going rate for tuition at the local college. Naturally, the owners had about 15 cameras installed that played on a live feed in the office and in the storefront for customers to see, so they know that they weren't being slick. I'm putting the final totals into a calculator, and she screams. She calls me over to the camera feed, and there it is. On the top right feed, very clearly, there is what looks like a figure in a white, boxy nightgown type of dress. Now, we are both nearly pissing our pants, but we can't leave. There's still a bunch of stuff to get done, and the owners and the opener tomorrow will be pissed if we just ditch the last half of our closing responsibilities on account of a ghost. We watch it, stunned as it appears to sway, and suddenly a huge spider obscures the view of the figure. We, 2 grown women, have been near tears for what feels like ages, because we've been watching a spider web that the AC blew in front of the camera. Okay, so that one definitely is a little bit more lighthearted and just kind of fun. But honestly, I just really like this one because I feel like that's something that I would definitely do. However, I will say, if you know me, I would actually be more afraid of the spider than of if it was a real ghost. So I guess there's that to think about. But yeah, I don't know. I just kind of like that story. I think it's kind of fun. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into a story that's a little bit creepier. This one is coming from the subreddit No Sleep, and this is an old one actually. It was posted about 11 years ago. So first of all, I only just discovered this subreddit today, which reminded me of something that happened to me back in 2008. This was a huge thing to my friends and family, and I didn't really talk about it back then, as honestly it scared the crap out of me. But it was a while ago, and it is a really well-known creepy story among myself and my friends and family. But I think I might as well share it because it is admittedly terrifying. I was living with my parents and sister in Brisbane, Australia at the time. This was 2008, which means I was 19. I remember my dad had just got Foxtel, which is cable TV in Australia, but only the TV in the lounge room could actually use the cable box, and I really wanted to somehow get the cable in my room without paying $99 or whatever it was for a new box. So one day my dad went out and bought an AV transmitter/receiver. It was basically a 2-piece bit of hardware where you would plug this tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room, and it would transmit a video signal to the receiver connected to the TV in my room. So one Saturday I decided to connect it. My younger sister, who was 16 at the time, was the only person home other than me, and she was upstairs in her room. My room was downstairs. I opened the box and connected it up. At first, I was going back and forth, trying to get the cables right, trying to get the channel right, etc., but no luck, until I finally got something. I remember just sitting there and something fuzzing in, and this is where things really start to feel like a horror movie. I remember thinking, oh, here we go, and waiting for the picture to come in clearly. As it started fuzzing in, I remembered that this whole time the cable set top box wasn't even on, and that's why it wasn't working the whole time. But then, why was I getting a signal? It all seemed to just hit me all at once. As soon as I realized that the box was off, the picture fuzzed in, and I saw a bed. Now, I freaked the hell out because I thought that it was my bed. I had recently seen Saw 2, and I was remembering that scene where she turns on the TV and it's a camera filming in her apartment. That was the first thing that I thought of. I sprinted upstairs to my sister, absolutely terrified, and I told her to come down and take a look. She came down, and we both realized that it wasn't my bed, but we didn't know whose bed it was or how I was even getting this signal in the first place. Obviously, it was the AV receiver picking up a camera signal, but we were just so confused as to who or what it was for. Eventually, my parents came home and we concluded that it would have to be a neighbor or somebody living close by for us to actually be able to receive the signal. We waited until about 6 p.m. and then someone came into the room. My dad recognized this person as one of our neighbors. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed at first that it had something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or he had set it up to watch the other and see if they were cheating. Either that or it was to tape themselves having sex. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer and would film himself murdering people in his room, but that was just to freak each other out. We'd always make jokes about how one night we'll turn it on and it'll just be his face with clown makeup or staring at the camera waving and then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. This never happened, but what did happen was still super creepy. We connected to this signal for over a week, but after a few days the novelty kinda wore off. We felt a little bit weird watching it and just kind of resigned to the explanation that it was to catch his wife cheating. Until one day we turned it on and then we realized exactly what we had discovered. Our neighbors were having a bunch of renovations done to their house, so during weekdays they would be out and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like this for pretty much over a month. We started watching the feed and we saw a man walk into their room. It was the plumber that had been there regularly for the renovations. We didn't think anything of it until he started opening drawers. I called out to my mom, who was the only person home at the time, and we started watching it. He started getting the wife's underpants and sniffing them, doing all that creepy shit. At first we were like, oh my god, how embarrassing, he's being filmed. Will the neighbors see this somehow? But then what happened next was truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the camera and looked right down at the lens. We were convinced that he knew we were watching. Mom immediately called Dad. I kept watching. He started fiddling with it and then he put it back down. I told Mom that I don't think he knew we were watching, but he is definitely the person who put that camera there. Dad came home and by this time the plumber had left. Much due to Mom's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbors to tell them what we had seen. Mom wanted to stay completely out of it and was terrified, understandably. When we told the neighbors, they had no idea what we were talking about. They allowed Dad to go up to their room, and what he found that was holding the camera was an installed device in the wall that was designed to monitor water usage. Now, this was totally normal at the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently and there were a lot of water restrictions, and it still is now, I think. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but had fitted a camera behind it in the wall to watch the bed. Immediately, our neighbors called the police, who came over and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear too much about it. I spent most of this time just telling my friends, showing them pictures, but truthfully, my whole family was scared every night. It was just very creepy thinking that we could have stuff like that hidden in our house. Chances are we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple of weeks, my mom was speaking to the wife next door and asked what had actually happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out that he would at night come to our street and sit in his car, which had really tinted windows, and watch them on his laptop. When Mom told me this, I got the biggest shivers. The reason was, besides the obvious creepy dude sitting in his car watching people through a hidden camera, because on multiple nights when I had driven home late from my girlfriend's or walked home drunk after a night out, I remember seeing a station wagon. I don't know if that's what they're called outside of Australia. I think they are. But it's like a big hatchback car, always about 30 meters down the street from our house. It was never there during the day, always at night. I'd always walk past it and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming that no one was inside. I was always so confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought that it was anything. It still scares me so much that it was this creepy plumber sitting back there on a laptop watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbors. Anyway, that's my story. It's all true and still creeps me out to this day, but my friends and I have a pretty good laugh about it. Oh my god, I don't even know what to say about this story. First of all, let's just start off by saying that I am so glad that everyone is okay and that this plumber was only just sitting outside, even though that's still really bad. Like, at least he wasn't trying to break in at night, or he wasn't looking through the windows or anything like that, I think. But still, it's so creepy. I mean, you really just don't know when you're hiring somebody, or like you have someone in your house, even like landscapers or something like that. You just don't know. When it's somebody who's in your house, when you're not there, you have to be so diligent and careful about knowing what they're doing. But even then, like, it's not like these people could have avoided it. They were at work, you know? Oh, that's just so scary. And it's awful to think that somebody would violate someone else's privacy like that. I can't imagine how disgusted and how creeped out the neighbors themselves must have felt. And this poor kid to like walk by every single day, this car, all of it is just so wrong and it's so creepy. And I want to get that story out of my head. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Now, I'm going to preface by saying that this one is pretty long, but the title of it did really catch my attention. It's called Found a Video Camera in a Hidden Room in My Closet. There's lots of movies in it. I'm on one of them. So we're starting off good here because that's super creepy and very alarming, but I don't want to waste time jabbering too much since this is a fascinating story, so we're going to go ahead and just jump on right into it. This one also is coming from the subreddit No Sleep and was posted about 10 years ago. Oh, but one more thing before we actually do get into this story, sorry. I like this story because it's from Phoenix, Arizona, and if you all don't know, I live about an hour away from Phoenix, so I was like, oh my god, a place that I know is in one of the stories that I'm going to tell. That's pretty cool. And I am not plugging my next episode or anything like that. But just know that the next episode is also going to be a story from the Phoenix, Tucson area. So that's pretty interesting. So anyway, now let's start the story. Me and my family moved to Phoenix, Arizona from Tucson last year. We were used to living in tightly compacted neighborhoods with community pools and like that whole lot. You know the deal, little to no backyard, every house has the same floor plan, etc. Then one day my parents decided they had had enough of cramped city life and decided that they wanted to live on a horse property up north in Phoenix. It was closer to family and there were more job opportunities, among plenty other reasons. I'm not quite sure exactly what the main motivation was though. The property they bought was pretty much built to house horses, sheep, etc. I wouldn't call it a farm, but it felt a lot like one. It was 3 acres of huge shade trees, dirt, and the occasional grass patch. It was pressed right up on South Mountain, high up enough so that at night you could see the Phoenix city lights. The house itself was luxurious enough, 2-story, Spanish hacienda style, kind of old looking. I don't know much about the house's history other than that the previous owners were a flamboyant retired couple who decided Arizona heat wasn't their cup of tea anymore. For those of you who don't live in Arizona or like in the area, Phoenix is usually like 115, something like that during the summer, so we don't blame these people at all. Phoenix is crazy. Upon moving in on the first night, we did encounter a pack of coyotes sniffing around the property line and a scorpion on the kitchen counter, so I don't quite blame them. I liked the house, I guess. It felt a bit barren and lonely at first, but a few months in, we had 4 horses, plenty of goats, and even a friendly chicken named Helena? Not sure. The property was bustling to say the least. I liked my school, home life wasn't boring, and our family was okay. I actually settled in pretty quickly. The only thing that might have hinted toward a bit of oddness was about 6 months after we moved in. My dad worked as a truck driver for some time and had to go up into Ohio for a few weeks. He returned with a female Belgian Tervuren dog. The dog was already a little bit old, about 8 years old, and acquired right off of an Amish community, but that was good because it meant that she was already experienced with animals. We named her Zasha, after the dog in the book Saving Zasha, and she settled in quickly. She was pretty strange. She was very hasty about coming inside the first few nights. We assumed that it was because she wasn't allowed to where she came from, but even as she got comfortable slipping in and out of the house, she did prefer to sleep on the back porch despite how hot it got in the summer. Though she adored running around the property and around the central parts of the house where most of the commotion would happen, like the kitchen and living room, she had a horrid fear of my bedroom. She was already reluctant about going upstairs in general, yet sometimes followed us anyway. However, my bedroom was hell for her. We even tried one day to shove her in, and she promptly dug her claws into the floor and scrambled away. One night, when we were hosting a small get-together with the family, we noticed that Zasha was missing. The Arcadia door was open the entire time, though, so we just assumed that she was out mingling with the animals to hide away from all the people we had over. We ignored the situation and continued on chatting and eating until all of a sudden there was a loud bang, followed by a symphony of vicious barking and growling. I've heard Zasha bark and growl plenty of times, either as warning signs to strangers, protecting her food from insistent goats, and even at coyotes, and all had sounded downright intimidating at the time, but this took the cake. She sounded absolutely ready to kill. It made everyone promptly freak the hell out and rush upstairs, only to find that Zasha was directing her attack at something in my doorway. We did turn the corner expecting to see like a snake or maybe even an intruder, but instead we found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Thin air. We didn't know what to attribute the loud bang to, but my family preferred to just ignore that and called Zasha old and delusional. We had to rip her away from the doorway and shove her outside, and even then she was clawing urgently at the door as if she felt the need to defend us from something. It scared me, but I avoided speaking up about it under the fear that my family would laugh at me and call me paranoid. So flash forward to now, I had just gotten home from school, the house was relatively empty as both of my parents were working and my siblings had sports practice. Zasha was sprawled out in the dirt under a tree, eyeing up the goats and wagging her tail when a baby goat sniffed her warily. I knocked on the screen door to grab her attention, not quite wanting to be alone in the house when I had a dog. Obediently, she sprinted towards the door and leaped through before making herself cozy on the cool tile in the kitchen. I'd already grabbed a Sprite from the refrigerator and was ready to throw myself down on the couch and turn on the TV when suddenly there was another loud bang. Zasha immediately jumped up and began growling, pointing her body like an arrow at the staircase as if it were prey. I immediately felt chills run through my entire body. Now, forgive me if I sound a little too paranoid, but I'm a 110-pound 5'3" female who has little to no chance of surviving an attacker. Naturally, I bounded over to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife that I could find, convinced that if I was armed, I could maybe overpower the obvious intruder. Zasha beat me to investigating the situation as she promptly ran straight up the stairs, leaving me in the dust. Fearing the worst for the slightly too confident dog, I ran up after her. To my utter shock, she bounded straight into my room, heart set on once and for all devouring whatever it was she was so scared of. My room is quite large and has a walk-in closet with no doors, so you quite literally just have to walk in. Therefore, it surprised me when she dove straight into the back end of my closet and began sniffing and snorting insistently on the wall behind my rack of clothes, even scratching. I sighed. Okay, maybe a mouse in the wall or something is what I presumed. I know it still doesn't explain the loud bang, but I was ready to try and rationalize anything. Still curious, though, I did walk up to where Zasha was snorting around and hesitantly pulled back the rack of clothes. There was a square cut into the wallpaper. It was door-shaped and couldn't fit an average person, but it was short enough that said person would have to crawl to enter. I, at first, did not realize it was a door. It didn't really look like one, rather than just a perfectly aligned tear in the wallpaper, but upon running my fingers along it and force shoving it in, I found that it flopped forward and fell to the floor with a heavy clap. A cut out of my wall. All right. There was a light source from somewhere inside this crawl space, I guess. I am the biggest scaredy cat and would probably always live in a scary movie because of how I absolutely nope out of any potentially dangerous situation, which is exactly what I did. I got a peek of what looked like a room and I bolted. I raced down the stairs and out the back door so quickly my thigh actually cramped because I was running so fast. The first thing that I did was race to the safety of the animals. Yeah, I know they can't help, but other living things are comforting, and grabbed my phone out of my pocket. Zasha followed me a little more slowly and peering behind her shoulder every few seconds as if she knew exactly what was happening and was more fed up than frightened. I dialed my mom immediately, but she answered with a choppy, "I'm at work, sweetheart. You know not to call me here. I get off in 15 minutes. I'll call you back. Love you. Bye." I was then hung up on. I tried next to call my brother and sister, but both phones were turned off. I felt like ripping out my hair. I contemplated calling 911, but what for? I needed emergency assistance because I found a crawl space in my house? What if there was absolutely nothing in it? In the broad daylight and with horses staring at me curiously like nothing had happened, it felt ridiculous to freak out so much over something as simple as that. I finally worked up the courage to at least check what was in there after about 5 minutes or so. When I went back up, flanked by Zasha, who no longer looked angry but more curious than anything, I found everything to be exactly the same, the cutout of my wall sitting neatly on the floor, and the bright illuminated hole still standing patiently. Slowly, I crouched down and peered through. It was boxes. There were loads of them. This seemed pretty tame, and it seemed to be the only thing in there from my point of view. I never, ever would have gone in there myself, but Zasha zipped right through when she realized I wasn't running away from it and began to sniff around in the room. I tried calling her out, but she just looked at me over her shoulder like a disapproving mother-in-law and continued her quest for interesting scents. Feeling like she was never going to get out, I was faced with the reality that I was going to have to crawl in and get her out myself. So I did. The room was so small that even at my short height, I could feel the ceiling brush my head every time I took a step. A few steps in, as I observed the stacks of cardboard boxes, I came across something. A blue sleeping bag. At first, I froze, absolutely positive that some psycho was right behind me and was going to clamp the hole shut and lock me in for all of eternity because I had discovered their secret. But then I rationalized it was just a little bit more junk that happened to be spread out neatly on the floor, coincidentally, obviously, because that happens. I worked up the courage to approach the sleeping bag. As more of it came into view, I noticed a small camera positioned neatly on top. Next to it was a jar of salted peanuts. I would have frozen up again, and I did, but much more briefly this time as I had already given myself enough scares for it to have pretty much just gotten old. I crouched down and picked up the video camera. It was an old-style one, the one that had a little flip-out viewing screen. It turned on and had nearly a full battery percentage. Just then, I heard the front door slam and immediately bolted out of the room, camera in hand. It turned out that it was my mom, returning from work as promised. I immediately ran down to explain what had happened desperately. She at first was skeptical, rolling her eyes and throwing around the word really a few times before finally becoming convinced and following me up the stairs. She poked around in this room as well. We found the boxes to be full of normal attic junk like old toys, figurines, blankets, kitchen Tupperware. The sleeping bag and snacks were still there. When I presented to her the camera, my mom, always the better thinker, quickly said that we had to view what was on it. Grabbing some sort of cord, I have little to no education on stuff like this, and some other things, she hooked the camera up to our TV. The first tape was of the mountain, South Mountain to be precise. The cameraman was zoomed in on the mountain, recording the rows of blinking lights on the antennas on top of the mountain before zooming out and giving a view of the street. Our street. He walks for a bit before stopping and turning to zoom in on our neighbor's house. He views them for a while before continuing to walk. At one point, the cameraman even points the camera downwards and zooms in on his own feet, which are covered in brown boots. The guy turns and finally his camera rests on our house. There's a sigh from the cameraman, and then the clip ends. In the next one, it's daytime. The cameraman is in a parking lot. He walks confidently, godlike normally, into a supermarket and begins browsing some watermelons towards the entrance silently. It's pretty boring, stretching out for a good 4 minutes or so, until suddenly he aims his camera up and zooms in on a cluster of people. It's unclear what he's focusing on until an elderly couple come into view. I recognize them immediately. They're the couple that lived on the property before we moved in. The cameraman keeps his camera aimed on them for the rest of the video. He moves with them, keeping a safe distance but never actually losing sight of them. He follows them through the whole store, even peeking over aisles to get different shots of them. Abruptly, the camera turns around to a store employee who taps the cameraman's shoulder angrily and inquires on what exactly he is filming. The clip ends. The next one is the first absolutely alarming tape. It starts off with the camera pointed downwards, shaking as the man walks. It's nighttime and it's very obviously the side of our house. The cameraman stops as he reaches the kitchen window and aims his camera right through the window pane where the couple are playing music loudly and sipping wine happily. They begin to playfully dance with each other as the old man talks about moving up towards Canada. They actually did go through with this. The rest of the clip is merely watching them. For the next 5 clips, it's just the cameraman spying on them. In dental appointments from their backyard, and at one point the cameraman slips through the door when it's left unlocked and he begins poking around in their stuff. At one clip, the first thing seen is the front of the house, the man waiting with ragged breath in presumably a bush. It's nighttime again, and he's obviously very excited for something. For the first time, we hear him talk as he whispers, "Come on," urgently. It's unclear exactly what he's waiting for until the old couple come outside to their lawn. The cameraman jumps up from a crouching position then, but the couple is joined by 3 other people, a couple and their child. They're all carrying drinks and settle themselves into lawn chairs, clearly planning on spending the rest of the night lounging about outside. The cameraman practically slumps and sits down again. He watches them for 10 minutes until his camera points downward. He has a gun laying neatly in his lap. The last clip the cameraman has of the couple is when they're moving. The final moving trucks come to get the last of their furniture, and the clip pretty much consists of the couple standing outside, complaining about how hot it is and barking orders at movers. The next clip is of a real estate agent. I recognize her immediately too. She is the one who sold us the property. She's walking around confidently, surveying the stables and exterior of the house. She opens her cell phone and makes a call to somebody about how dingy the place is and how she'll never sell the dump without some major flipping. Rude, by the way. And looks really pleased when it seems that she wins an argument. She then leaves and the clip ends. The next clip is of me. This time it's positioned from inside the room. The cutout door is obviously taken away, and the cameraman pokes his camera lens through my rack of clothes discreetly to film me. I'm walking around angrily, arguing on the phone with my dad about how he never comes straight home when he comes back into town. I remember that day clearly. I finally hang up on my dad and throw the phone on my bed before walking out. The clip ends. The next clip is of the day that Sasha freaked us out. The cameraman is positioned at the top of the stairs, lying down and trying his best to discreetly film us through the railing. Sasha is lying down on the floor boredly. The cameraman zooms in on her, then backs out on the rest of the family. He seems to zoom in on everything. The food, each of our faces, and even at one point on my mom's ass. This goes on for an agonizingly long time before he accidentally drops the camera on the next step, which created that loud bang that we heard. Even dropped, the camera still records Sasha jumping up and racing up to the noise. The cameraman scurries to collect his camera and all about throws himself through my closet and into this room. Sasha follows him straight in, barking and growling angrily. He tries to wave her away, but she merely snarls at him and tries to snap at his hand. With no choice left, he turns and grabs a small elephant figurine lying in a box and throws it at her. It hits her forehead and is enough to scare her into backing out of the room, but she still barks insistently at the doorway. The figurine slides under my dresser, and when the cameraman hears us clambering up the stairs, he plugs the hole with the cutout and waits with ragged breath. Our muffled voices, concerned and confused, are heard in the room. The cameraman listens until we shrug and drag her back down the stairs. The clip then ends. It's not the last clip. There's tons more with plenty of recent dates, but we don't bother to watch them. My mom called the police a while ago and a bunch of cop cars came. I've been frozen in the corner for hours as the cops questioned everyone. My siblings came home and were pretty angry at the sight of police and accused me and my mom of overreacting. They only vaguely just heard snippets of us discovering a crawl space, but I hardly care if they understand. I'm still trying to process everything myself. I'm just trying to understand what caused the bang that made me find that room in the first place. Oh my god. Okay, so I know that this sounds like a horror movie, but this is something that actually happens a lot more commonly than people would probably like to think, and I've actually heard a lot of stories and seen a lot of clips from security cameras and stuff where people literally just live in somebody else's house, almost like squatting, but they find an attic area or a basement area or a little crawl space like this, and they just kind of move in and just set up shop, which is so scary. But I think the scariest thing about it is that it sounds like a horror movie, but it's not. This is real. This stuff actually happens to people, and I can't even imagine how haunting it would be to watch a video like that of yourself. Ugh. This is one of those stories that really gives me nightmares, honestly, just even thinking about the possibility of something like that happening. But even that, you don't know, right? There could be cameras left in your house from the previous owners. If you go to an Airbnb or a hotel, people always say make sure that you look for cameras. This stuff is happening all over the place. That's just, ugh. It's just so scary. I don't even know how else to describe it. I just cannot imagine. You'd never get over it. You would just be thinking about this for the rest of your life. Anywhere you move, it's oh my god, what if there's someone watching me? That's so crazy. It's so scary. Whew, but anyway, let's go ahead and get into our last story for the day. This is a Reddit story that's coming from the subreddit No Sleep. It's my favorite one right now. So we're going to end on this one because this one I'm actually pretty sure just is not true. And I hope that it is, because if this is real, then I'm going to be moving to the planet Mars tomorrow. So we're going to end on a probably made up story that will still give you full body goosebumps. But I guess it's less scary if it's not real. But not by much. It was just supposed to be a stupid prank. You know how some people can hack into Ring cameras? My friend Johnny is a computer whiz, and he thought it would be the funniest shit to scare someone senseless by spying on them and talking out of the microphone. That, by the way, is not funny. In retrospect, it was a terrible idea. Even at the time, it felt sort of gross, but we're 15 years old. Besides, Eddie was on board and I didn't want to be the party pooper telling them that we should not break the law and spy on people because that would be totally lame, right? It took about an hour for Johnny to hack into the camera. The account was registered to a guy who lived over 1,000 miles away in Texas. The three of us huddled around the computer as the live feed loaded. What if it's people having sex? Score! Dude, no one would set up the camera in their bedroom. Who said they'd be in the bedroom? At that point, we were cut off by the video feed filling the screen. For a whole 10 minutes, it was just an empty kitchen, completely boring. It looked like a rich kitchen, though, with all the stuff you see in Home Depot that my mom would drool over every time we went. We waited. Eddie opened a bag of chips and started eating. Shh, they'll hear you, Johnny hissed. A few more minutes went by. Finally, a shadow appeared on the wall, and then a woman walked into view. Much to our disappointment, she wasn't hot. Mean. She was older, about 60 or so, with blonde hair cut into a severe bob. Looked rich from her clothing and stuff. She was looking back into the hallway, talking to someone off screen. "What's she saying?" Eddie whispered. "Shh." We listened, and finally I could make out a few snippets of her words. "Leave it here tonight. Deal with it tomorrow. In the freezer." Johnny leaned towards the computer, a wicked grin on his face. He opened his mouth to yell something into the microphone, but at that moment, someone else came on screen. It was a man, but he didn't look like he was her husband. He looked like he was maybe half her age and about a foot taller than her. A buff guy, the kind of guy you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley late at night. His pale blue eyes swept across the kitchen, then he stepped in front of the fridge. "The freezer?" he asked, his low voice clearly audible. She nodded. He opened the left side of the fridge, presumably the freezer, and began pulling everything out of it. Not just the food, but the shelving and the drawers as well, like my mom does when she's doing a deep clean. Finally, he stood up, brushed off his pants, and walked back out of the kitchen. When he came back, he was dragging something behind him. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. A large, long object in a black trash bag slid over the kitchen floor behind him. He stopped in front of the fridge for a moment, then he crouched down. With a grunt, he lifted the thing upright and began trying to shove it in the freezer. Johnny, Eddie, and I looked at each other, our mouths just hanging open. I knew we were all thinking the same thing. Is that a body? The man gave the thing another good shove, but instead of fitting it into the freezer, it fell back out towards him. He dodged, and it fell on the ground with a sickening thwack. But in the fall, the trash bag shifted, and poking out of the bag was a bloody, pale hand. Johnny, Eddie, and I screamed, but as soon as the sound left my lips, I remembered. The microphone is on. Their heads snapped toward us. There was a pause. "Was that coming from the camera?" she muttered to the man. Someone might have hacked your camera. "It happens," he replied. He sounded fearful. But the woman didn't show an ounce of fear. She ran to the camera, her entire face filling the screen, jowls jiggling, wrinkled lips pressed together. Her hard, dark eyes stared into the camera, even though she couldn't see us. And then she spoke. "If you tell a soul about what you saw, I will rip your heads off." Then she picked up the camera. The feed filled with blurry, twisted shapes as it was tiled around, and then everything went black. I stared at Johnny and Eddie, shaking. By the time I looked at the computer, we'd been logged out of the account. It's been 3 months since that happened. I eventually did tell the police, well, my parents did, but I don't remember the name on the account, and Johnny hasn't been able to log back in. Apparently, he got their info from a data breach at another company, and now that they've changed their password, he doesn't have a chance. He did pass along the email that was linked to the account, though. So far, we've heard nothing from the police or the woman, but I'm terrified, because just a few days ago, my parents decided to get a Ring camera for our front door. And when I got back from school yesterday, I could have sworn I heard something come through the microphone, just for a second. Whew, okay. I like ending on that one because, like I said, I'm pretty sure that that isn't true. And if it is true, don't tell me because I'm happy to say that it isn't and then, like, still be able to sleep at night, you know. But that being said, like, this is obviously really creepy, really scary, but this person said that they were 15, and I don't think that 15-year-old boys use words like sickening thwack or wicked grin or like blonde hair cut into a severe bob. Like, that doesn't sound like something. I went to high school, right? That doesn't sound like something that a high school student would say. So that's why I don't think this is true. But again, I honestly just like really hope that it's not. I don't know. But anyway, if you have made it this far, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Crime Bistro Podcast. I really like these episodes where it's like a little bit more laid back, and I'll use this as a time to tell you to enjoy that while it lasts because we do have a really, really horrifying case for next week. Anyway, I just want to say thank you again, and until next week, you can always keep up with the podcast on TikTok or by visiting the website. Those are both some pretty fun places to hang out, if I do say so myself. All of that being said, thank you again so much for listening, and we're going to end here, as always, until next time.